My fallacious Americans, the election has come and gone, and to judge by the outcome, it would appear that over half of you failed to grasp our previous discourse on the subject of supporting the underdog. You were supposed to vote for Pedro, not against him. Back on D-Day, I told you that if you do good, there would only be one Raw editorial this year. But if you do bad, there were gonna be two. Be sure and tune in next week for that second Raw editorial. Along about now, the genuine president who you have in office, together with the vice president, who it would appear is going to be denied rightful succession to that self-same office, the two of them are both promoting a conciliatory attitude in lieu of the results of the election. An attitude which diminishes divisiveness and encourages uniformity, general coming together for the greater good. You see, this is what authentic, responsible public and civic leaders do. They set a good and decent example for the people to follow. And whereas it is not my intention in any way to discourage or to undermine this school of thought, like a lot of you, I find myself incapable of adopting a conciliatory approach to any of this at all. Nah. I find that I am unable to look casually upon that which is a casualty, an injury, a lethal wound inflicted upon our mutual horizons. Like a lot of you, I knew that if the vice president won, we were going to be faced with a staggering amount of work to do. And again, like a lot of you, I was prepared to shoulder my share of that workload. But now, with regard to, if not with any respect to, the election, we are still faced with an insurmountable burden of work, although it is a different kind of work altogether. It is the sort of work which is to be maintained by preparation and perseverance, by resistance, by defiance, and by defense. It is a sort of work which is undertaken by always keeping in perspective the overall integral composite, that is to say, the bigger picture. Always keeping in mind the bigger picture, instead of fixating upon the isolated immediacy of today and only today alone. No. Always keeping in mind the bigger picture. Something which apparently half of the Americans out there either are unable or unwilling to do. Speaking for myself, I know of no other way. When I was preparing our 11th hour editorial, I wanted the extra time to remind you that next year will mark the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Stands to reason whoever wins the election is going to be the head of state who will be expected to preside over any ceremonies commemorating that milestone. This in turn might well put you in mind of the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, and who the pretend incumbent in office at that time was. Do you happen to recall to mind the detached, dispassionate, disinterested, bored quasi-presence which that specimen made over in Europe at all of those commemorative ceremonies? A disgrace, an embarrassment, disgusting, shameless. These words don't begin to convey the dishonor shown to everybody dead and gone in that conflict. Did you know that for the past year or so, speaking of centennials, I have been hoping and praying that Jimmy Carter would reach his 100th birthday. And he did. He reached his 100th year. Now that he's done this, God forgive me, I find myself praying that if he is in fact ready to go, that he will pass away before the 20th of January. Because if he doesn't, then it furthermore stands to reason that whoever wins the election, that is to say, whoever is the head of state, when that time comes, will be expected as the head of state to preside over any kind of state funeral. Again, unthinkable, unimaginable. And this takes us back to the 80th anniversary of the Second World War. A war ironically fought against tyranny and oppression. But you see, half of the Americans out there, they don't care about this sort of thing. No. This doesn't figure in as a priority to them, which begs a question. What then is a priority to these people? And the answer becomes readily apparent. When pressed to answer the question as to how could they conceivably justify voting for that fraud, these people will cling to the only excuse which they actually think is defensible and cite inflation and the economy, thereby confirming that to them it is and always only has been all about money. And in doing so, they will demonstrate to the entire world that half of the Americans in this country can be bought. That their votes are for sale. That their votes can be bought and if needs be bribed. They display that half the Americans out there can be bought and sold like whores. And they reveal for all to see that the vote of the American consumer becomes an American commodity. And in speaking of that half of the country, we must likewise reference an element out there which apparently is actually benighted enough to believe that this degenerate is both empowered and favored by divine right, by an act of divine intervention. That God Almighty on high has preordained as a figure of salvation a reprobate who is the biblical embodiment of all 7 deadly sins, and who is furthermore synonymous with everything from psycho-babbling Babylon to worship of the golden calf. Oh, but no blasphemy is intended. It very probably is an act of divine intervention. Although an act of divine retribution, of divine punishment, in the form of a creature unleashed against society, that it might impose suffering upon everybody, but none more so than those who are going to suffer the most. Which brings us to the main point, the question of culpability, guilt, and blame. For verily I say unto thee that I beseech thee, do not blame the degenerate. No, don't blame the degenerate for any of this. I don't. If you bring a razorback hog with you to church this Sunday, a razorback hog with narcissistic psychopathological tendencies, you bring him with you to services at your church this Sunday, can you rationally, justifiably be surprised at any of the misconduct, at any of the harm which this razorback hog is going to bring to the inside of that church? Any of the hurt that he's going to impose upon the congregation? How can that plausibly come as any kind of surprise to you? No, don't place all the blame on this degenerate himself alone. I don't. Even though he is someplace where he definitively has no business being. No, you place the blame where the blame belongs. You blame the right-wing extremists who support him, you blame the worthless Republicans who enable him, and you blame the half of this country who sold their vote to him. They haven't won this election. They haven't won anything. They have only lost everything, and they are going to go on to lose even more than everybody else because they are the ones who have compromised the most. Honor, respect, integrity, honesty, decency, By betraying these virtues, they have flung themselves past the point of collective redemption. As for the other half of the country, for those of you out there who, ironically, really wanted to make America great, for those of you who had hoped to make the world a better place, and for those of you who are working toward making your lives more passably passable, more livable, more fulfilling, you have not lost anything at all. Least of all, both the opportunity as well as the obligation to go right on fighting the good fight in any way that you think is best. On that note, the holiday season will soon be upon us, and it is highly likely that very shortly you will be seeing your Aunt Magga and your Uncle Outright and all of these other barnyard specimen again. And when you do, when they come marching into the room all smiles and victorious, you just remember that it is your prerogative to hound, harass, and harangue, ridicule, mock, scorn, and lambast all of them for the treason in which they have willingly participated. Yes, indeed. You make certain that this is the most memorable and miserable Thanksgiving that any of them has ever experienced. And don't forget about Christmas, too. As for myself, whereas I shall be passing the holidays in blissful solitude, I will proceed in the same spirit, I can assure you. You would have no way of knowing this, but somewhere out there, possibly even watching right now, you have a little baby punk cousin who is a closet, hidden, secret, Make America Great Again supporter, a devotee, an acolyte, hook, line, and sinker. There's some doomsday film he's been wanting me to watch. Children of Man? I finally got to see that. I've got all kinds of impressions to share with you about that picture, and we'll have ourselves a nice long conversation about it. Right after the assassination, or the resignation, or the indictment, or any other form of absolute removal from office. Then, or at such point in time wherein you pull your head out of your punk ass and renounce and denounce that worthless, degenerate trash. Because until that point in time, I don't really expect to be a part of your life anymore. Oh, but look at it this way. Look at the bright side. Maybe you lost a godfather, but you gained, well, you didn't really gain anything. You only lost. And on that note, as for the rest of you out there, for that one half of this country that saw fit to prolong this nightmare into overtime, it is, as it were, incumbent upon me to tell all of you, go fuck yourself. But you see, that is not sufficient to the task. It is neither pronounced nor profane enough to convey the amount of contempt which you have heaped upon yourselves. No, we must employ a different maxim, one which will compel you to finish doing what you have started. Now, I won't tell you, go fuck yourself. To each and every last one of you, I say, go rape yourselves.